that's right. Okay. So yeah, that's the name of our company, and that's our logo. That's animated. My name is Shane Marks. I work for Necrosoft Games as a game developer, doing programming and development and all a bunch of stuff because we're a really small company. So everyone kind of ends up doing a lot of different things. So I'll just tell you a little bit about me, how the company started, the cool stuff we're doing, and then I'll show a little bit in Unity, and then I'll just let you ask a bunch of questions because you probably have stuff that you want to ask that I won't talk about. So originally I went to college in Carlow, did games development there, did my internship in Microsoft. Then I went to work for a small mobile games company in Galway called Tribal City Games. And then I left there to go work with my friends in Necrosoft Games. So that is me. And Necrosoft Games started in 2012 by a person called Brandon Sheffield, who lives in Oakland, California. Brandon is a former editor of Game Developer Magazine. If anyone's ever seen that, it's a pretty big game development magazine. Pretty much anyone who's into game development probably reads it or has read it. And it's no longer in publication because people don't buy paper things anymore. So, and he's also a senior contributor at Gamma Sutra, which is the parent company for Game Developer Magazine, and it also runs GDC, which is a big games development conference. And so he writes articles there and stuff like that. So he started a company and then basically got a bunch of friends from all over the world to join because we all wanted to make games together and stuff like that. So we have kind of a distributed team all around the world, and as you can see here, a bunch of countries. So I'm here, obviously, and we have someone who's from Portugal and Hungary, and someone who is from Portugal again in Poland, and we have some various friends. So the people from Uruguay and Russia are contractors who do art for one of our games. Some of the people in the United States are just working on one game with us as friends and stuff like that, but this is a general team. And we all generally split into our own teams of what games we're working on. So I'm working on one game and helping out on the other ones, but then I contact my own team via email or we use a forum, it depends on the group. And everyone stays generally contacting their own group, and then every so often we'll all meet together and hang out. So in April last year, we all met in Krakow in Poland and hung out and just kind of had a good time. So that's the way we do stuff. And so now I'm going to show you our first game, and I'm going to show you a trailer and shut up for a sec. Okay, so that game was, we ended up getting a contract with PlayStation, Sony. We went to Sony and approached them and asked them if they would be willing to pay us to make our games for PlayStation Mobile. So PlayStation Mobile is a platform that Sony started, and you write games in C# and you release it on their store. And they tried to release it as an application that you would get on PlayStation Vitas and also on Sony Xperias or just Sony phones. And they kind of killed off the platform on Sony phones because they didn't, for whatever reason. Anyway, they paid us money to release 2 games on PlayStation Mobile, and one of them is Gunhouse. And so after we made that, we then convinced Microsoft to let us port it to Windows Phone. So Microsoft had this program where they give $20,000 to people to make exclusive games for Windows Phone. We instead said, hey, how about instead we just port our game and not make you something new? And they said, cool. So we did that. And probably later other platforms because we've ported it now. So people who did the stuff on that is, if you ever know Jim Crawford, who did Frog Factions, if any of you played that, it's a really weird and cool game on web that's free, you should check it out. And Richard, who did the music for Fez, did the music for that. And Ewan Ramirez did the art, and it's a really fun, cool game. It was made for the Peter Molyneux Jam, if any of you know that. If you know Peter Molyneux, the designer who made Fable, he basically there's this kind of joke game jam called the Molly Jam that takes tweets from his parody account, and you pick one. And so this one was about an orphans in a house, and people are trying to steal them. And so that house is actually an orphanage. So that is a joke. And the second game we put onto PlayStation Mobile that's not out yet, it's called Oh Dear. And so it's a pun, obviously, on deers. So in the game, you drive. It's kind of like Outrun, if any of you played that, which is basically you track and you race and you try and be cool. And you can either hit deer or not hit deer. Choice is yours. And if you hit deer, the world starts getting crazier and more violent and weird and just in general kind of evil. And then if you avoid deer, the world starts getting trippier and music starts getting more intense and everything like that. And the lead composer from this is the composer from Streets of Rage 3. We basically approached him and asked him to do the soundtrack, and he said sure. And then this is the only game he's done after Streets of Rage 3. And we asked him why he's never done a soundtrack since then, and he said that because no one has ever asked him. So go email people and ask them to do stuff, and they will do it. Okay, so the next game we're working on... Oh wait, I went too far. And I ruined it. This is a trailer for the next game. It's a little bit long, maybe a minute, but... So this is basically cyberpunk beach volleyball with guns.
This is the year 2000.
Yes, 2000 XX. And so, with this game then we have this band from New York called Ice Choir who are doing the audio, and we have about 4 artists working on it who work on various things. So some of them do the character design, some of them do other stuff. I can give you the specific details about it later, but the notes on my slides aren't there, so I can't tell you. So this game is being published by Iron Galaxies, which are the people who made Dive Kick, and they're also making Killer Instinct on Xbox One, and it's coming to PlayStation 4, Xbox One, and PC. And so, yeah, there you go. And next game we're working on is this game called Magic Hops. This is just a concept photo because I'll show you the build in a few minutes what it's currently at. So this is a game that we're working on with 4 people, and I'm the lead programmer on this. And the lead artist is Meryl Cartwright, who is the lead artist on Skullgirls, if you've ever played that game. It's a game on PlayStation 3 and Xbox One. I can't really tell you much more about that because it's not finished. So there you go. What am I going to do? Okay, let's see. So I'm just going to turn off the slides because we don't need them anymore. So the main thing we use for all this stuff is we generally use Unity because it allows us to do cross-platform stuff. So the original PlayStation Mobile stuff is written in C# using their very bad SDK, which can't render more than a couple hundred sprites. So we modified that engine to make it run over 1,000 or so sprites on screen, and then we ported it to Unity, and now we're kind of using Unity full-time because we're a team of like 5 or 6 people. So we can't really afford to run our own software and do all that kind of expense. So, and also then writing stuff in Unity lets us do it cross-platform and stuff like that. So have any of you used Unity or know anything about it, or what's your like level of stuff? Okay. So, basically no one kind of. So Unity is basically a proprietary 3D games engine that allows you to write games in C# using the Mono framework, which is basically an open source .NET framework. You can also write it in this thing that's JavaScript-alike called UnityScript, but it's awful and don't use it, and it's just terrible. But you can if you really like JavaScript, but it's weird JavaScript. It's got classes and all this other stuff that you don't want. And then they also have this language called Boo, which is like a Python-like language. Again, no one uses that. Just don't bother. Use C#. Everyone does. Or you quit the other languages and just use C# eventually. And So the biggest problem probably with using Unity is it's very, very bad with multiple people. Using a project with multiple people, it's awful. Source control, it's awful. You have to figure out weird ways of getting around that. If any of you know what dependency injection is or inversion of control, you pretty much have to get one of those types of frameworks to do work with multiple people, or else your project is a total disaster and a mess. And luckily for us, we've all got small teams, so we don't really run into that. But yes, so. And I'm going to show you a quick example of one of our projects in Unity so you can kind of see what it's like. And if you have any questions, then I'll just take them because it's easier. So, right. So this is the way the project's set up. We have like scenes. Scenes are just kind of parts of the game that load up in separate things. Kind of like you might have a menu as a scene. You might have the main game as a scene. You have different things as scenes. And then we've got all this. What? Oh, it's not on the screen. That is, I need to do that. Okay, sorry. So yeah, so you have scenes here, and all the scenes are, as I said there, and you've basically all these other types of content that you have for the game with sprites and scripts. And the scripts are just the scripts for the game. I can show you specifically stuff later on this. I mean, it's kind of hard to explain what. So this is the hierarchy in the scene of what all the objects exist. So if we turn this off, you can see that goes. So these are all the objects that exist inside the game. And so this scene at the top is your game scene, and this is the scene in the world. So if you zoom out, you can see that all this stuff exists outside of it. And if we just run it, this game should run, and everything should be okay. So yeah, you can see animating here and various other stuff like that we have in this demo that is really not ready yet. So we can switch on the animator, and I can show you some animations, I guess. Okay, so we have an animator here with some animations. Okay, sorry. So if we go back here. So yeah, we can see the current animation for one of the characters. So you can see it cycling through all the keyframes and stuff like that. And if you want to add more keyframes, you can just throw them in on top. Or you could create a new one here with a new clip. And basically you have all this. This is all very like Unity-centric. So if you go outside of Unity, this stuff kind of doesn't work. And there's third-party tools you can use called Spriter and stuff like this that avoid doing this. But for this game, it's going to be written entirely in Unity, imported with Unity, so we don't have to worry too much about that stuff. Yeah, I mean, does anyone else want to know anything specific? I guess I can ask questions now and stuff because there's a lot in here and I can't really explain it all so well. So, but this is the way our project is. This is actually an in-current game that has a bunch of stuff. I mean, you probably know what some of this is. The pool manager, I mean, the players are the players. The mascot is this thing here. And then all of these have scripts attached to them. So you can see here, there's various scripts and stuff like that. So, I mean, does anyone want to know anything about games or Unity or how we code or how we work or anything like that? Yes?
When you use Unity, if you're doing kind of like a 3D first-person world,
yeah.
Would you make your world inside Unity or would you use a tool like Blender?
It depends. For instance, if you have multiple people working on the project, then you're probably going to do it outside.
Yeah.
And load it in via XML or whatever else you want to do. It depends on the size of your team. For instance, like if you've got like 3 people, then it just makes sense to do it in Unity because you know no one's going to break the project. Whereas if you've got multiple people, you can't know what other people are going to do with these scenes, and so generally they'll break them. So the best way to avoid that is using XML with an external editor and doing that stuff. So, yeah. Yep.
You seem to have a kind of a 3D view. Is this scene actually on just a 2-dimensional plane within a 3D environment?
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay.
Yeah, all this stuff exists in 3D, and these are all layers, but the concept of 2D exists, but it's in a 3D environment. So everything's in 3D. So you can layer 3D objects on top of 2D objects, and they can exist in a scene, and you can choose where they get displayed. You can pick the layering on it. And yeah, everything is in 3D, because that's just any 2D game is really in 3D anyway. So you just have flat planes.
So does it have an inbuilt concept of layers when you're working with it?
Yeah, the engine has an inbuilt concept of layers. And I mean, if you weren't using this, you could create that yourself using OpenGL or whatever. But you have a concept of layers here, and then you have Z ordering and stuff like that. So you have Z ordering, which is basically the depth, and then internally you can also have groups. So for instance, we have like 4 or 5 groups where we have the background is one group, and and then the foreground is one group, and then the in-game active stuff is another group, and then inside that you can have layers. So there's multiple ways you can do layers, basically. Yeah.
What type of tasks would you use C# for as opposed to using kind of the GUI tools you just told?
Well, for C# you basically anything that you want that. So like how the blocks act in the game, like how like say in the other games, like how the like ball works. For instance, like you're doing physics over a network. You have to have like the both actions having the same weight. So it has to be deterministic. So you got to write that from scratch. So you'd write that all in C#. The engine won't do that. Basically anything that you want that's not like a GUI style thing. And even with that, like if you want specific things in your GUI, you have to modify them. So say all these things here, they're GUI elements, but they all have like actions in them. So when you're playing, they might pop out or do all this stuff. Basically any actions need C#.
How long does a game take usually to produce? Like I know
too
it's
long.
hard.
So the first game, Gunhouse, took maybe a year and a half.
Right.
Odir is not finished, so it's like nearly 2 years.
Yeah.
Gunsport should be finished next year, hopefully, and that's been going for. Then by the end of that, it'll be 2.5 years.
Right.
This game so far is probably in March or April when we close to a year. So you're talking 2-3 years. At least.
Do you build up libraries as you go along and reuse
yeah,
them?
sort of.
Things faster that way?
You do, you kind of do. Yeah, you build up certain libraries that you might use, but again, like the problem is as well, like if you're using an engine, the engine is advancing a lot, so a lot of those libraries kind of get thrown out. So say for instance, like Unity updated their whole GUI system. So if you build any tools to work with the GUI system, they're pretty much useless. Right. So there's that conflict of like them adding stuff and you doing things. But there's general like maths libraries and various other stuff that you're always going to switch across. Right. Or like say for instance they have a preference system for saving stuff in Unity, but it's all clear text. So you have to write cryptography on top of that to actually protect the data. Right. So that stuff, that's kind of libraries that we'd have and various other stuff like that.
The export tools for this to iOS and Android.
Yeah.
I was wondering the release onto those because it's quite easy just to.
Yeah. So the button, it's basically a button press.
Yeah.
And there's some stuff that's different. So for instance, if you're developing for Windows Mobile, they have a subset of .NET. It's not proper .NET, so there's a bunch of stuff missing. So you can't use certain string libraries and various other stuff like that. So they'll break. So you're just going to go watch for that. And also then if you want to use any of the native stuff, you generally have to write a plugin for Unity. So you write a bridge that accesses the native stuff. And that's not too much of a big deal, but like it also means you're writing the same stuff 3 times or 2 times or whatever. So yeah, generally you just kind of check the documentation, you're okay, and then the plugins, you have to know Java and you have to know Objective-C or C. So when we write plugins, we generally write them in C if we can, because nobody wants to do Objective-C. And with Windows Phone, it's C#, so you can just use C# again if you want. It's pretty straightforward as long as you're comfortable with other languages. If you're not, and you're not comfortable like with pointers and stuff like that, you probably won't be too happy. But I mean, if you're in games, you're probably already comfortable with that. I mean, most people in games don't want to use garbage collection or any of that stuff. So,
what do you think of the trend towards visual programming tools? So, like, there's a plugin called Playmaker. And then the Unreal Engine. That type of.
They're cool and they help you do stuff, but I feel like they're the kind of things that you should only use them when you understand what's actually happening. So a lot of people, they get them to begin with, and that's cool because you want to get them into like understanding the concepts of like game programming or whatever type of stuff. But a lot of the time, then they never go and actually learn how stuff works. So you can't realistically ask someone to develop a game for like a console that has no memory and expect them not to understand what's happening underneath. It's not going to happen. So like if you're doing it in Unity, you might get it on PS4 and it is like kind of like a button press, but at the end of the day, like that has way less memory. So even though the engine will port for you, you've got way less memory than you've got on PCs. So you still need to know how to cut that down and do all this stuff. So those tools can't do that. They're not smart enough to figure out all that stuff. So they're good if you know what you're doing.
Probably prototyping.
Yeah, prototyping. I mean, Unity is cool for prototyping as well, and it's cool for finishing. It's just at the end of the day, like the tool can only carry you so far. Like there's all really bad stuff you can do in Unity that a lot of people don't know. One of the worst things about Unity is there's too many beginners, so all the documentation is generally crap. Oh, the books are rubbish. I don't think I've actually read one good Unity book. They're all crap because they're all written for beginners. But they don't teach you stuff like rendering. Like they've got rendering calls and all this other way to like lower down your rendering calls. You want the rendering calls to be like lower than 20, and most people's stuff is like 200 to 300, if not 1,000 or whatever, and that's just like insane. You can't do that. And no book will talk about that. And there's all like basically all the documentation is, all the books are all crap, and all the like articles you see online are just like beginners. So you have this problem with people who are able to use this tool really well, but like can't hit the final mile because they don't understand any of this stuff. So that's the problem with this stuff.
Is there not a lot of stuff in that?
Yeah, but you have to know what you have to know what you need to ask. So the thing is, if you don't know what's wrong with your game, you can't just go, my game is slow. So, or you can't go like, my game is crashing. It's not. You need to if you don't even understand the vocabulary of what you're missing out on, you don't even understand how to ask it, and so that's the problem basically there. Yeah.
Is there a profiler I think built into it?
Yeah, it's really terrible. It's awful. It's like it's so bad that people like call it like the voodoo profiler. And people have actually written third-party plugins that are like what they call real profilers, because you basically get a bunch of information back, and it's sometimes you'll run it and it's fine. Other times you run it and it just makes no sense, and other times it's like whatever. Like it can be helpful, but it's also it can lead you down like a path that just has nothing and is totally useless.
So the trick is not to write any inefficient code in the first place.
I suppose the trick is basically just actually like really reading stuff properly and really going in, and if you don't understand what a thing is, actually going and finding out what it is. Like a lot of people, the problem is they might open up, so there's the stats button there, and it shows you a bunch of stuff. I'll show you. There's this that shows you all this bunch of detail, and you can't also trust this as well perfectly because it doesn't update every time and all this stuff. But there's a bunch of stuff here, and you should know what all this stuff is. And if you don't, you should actually go ask. And a lot of people don't, and that's then part of why they don't know how to ask questions and all this other stuff. But the profiler is just rubbish, and it's their fault. But also, like again, the profiler can also tell you stuff, and then people will search. They don't understand how to search that stuff, and whatever. I don't have these problems, but these are problems that people do have when they come in, because they just want to get the thing they want done, but they don't realize that they're actually creating a bunch of problems for themselves.
The number of animations is 0, is that?
Yeah, that's right, yeah, because the game's not running. Maybe there might be 1 or something if it runs. There's only like 2 or 3 animations in the game at the moment. Like animations are like when it's changing sprites and stuff. So, yeah.
And even on like sprite-based games like this, performance is still a big issue.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, for this game specifically, it won't be too much of a big deal until later. What will be a big problem with this is 1080p. So you've got textures that are 1080p, you've got a background, then you've got like, the background might have 4 types of layering on it, and they're not all going to be 1080p, but they're all going to be quite big. And then you add fluid animation, so you might have 50 frames of animation for one thing, and if the background's animating in some way and all these other things are animating, there's like, you're using a lot of RAM and you're just doing a lot of stuff there. So you're just using up, memory is basically the biggest problem. Yeah, so generally, yeah, you're just, basically at the final mark, when you're trying to polish stuff, polish is just really expensive. So that's pretty much where, so you can get the whole game working mechanically right, and then that's the final hurdle when people are like, want to publish it, so they want to make it feel like it's a finished thing, and then suddenly all these things start going crazy. Yeah.
Do you get away with the free license for this, or do you have to get?
We'll use Pro. Well, I only use free here because just whatever. I can do most of the stuff. The Pros, you do.
Why do you have to use Pro?
There's a whole bunch of stuff missing in Pro. So if you want to use certain shaders like reflective shaders or some type of translucent shaders, they're blocked because you can't use them. If you want to do stuff like certain types of loading, if you don't want to write your own custom loader, there's loading in Unity that's like, if you want to do additive or async loading, you need to pay for that. If you want to do something like sprite batching, so sprite batching is, we've all these separate sprites, and you sprite batch, so you put them all into one texture sheet, and then in the game you actually tell the game where they are, the quadrants, and that saves on memory and stuff and draw calls, because now when you're doing a draw call, it's just one sheet. And that's one draw call, rather than if you're all split, it's all separate draw calls. So that's cheaper, and that costs money unless you want to write your own one. So if you write a tool externally and do it, then it doesn't matter. But there's all these like little additions. So basically, if you want to publish, you probably will need Pro. As the plugins as well. If you want to write native bridges are Pro. basically, in a lot of aspects, like the engine is almost unusable unless you're willing to buy Pro. Some platforms are free, so Sony on Vita is free, and a few other platforms are free because they're trying to convince more people to go there and port applications. But other than that, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I kind of get mad about it, and I tell people just don't bother using it unless you use Pro. But you can not use it, but it's just you slowly realize over time there's quite a lot of stuff locked out. Yeah. So, yeah.
You're doing networking for like multiplayer games.
Oh yeah,
Do you have a central server somewhere? Or
Yeah.
is
So
that part of Unity or?
No, that's not part of Unity. So Unity has none of that stuff. Yeah. So it's So there is third-party companies who've written software for it that makes it almost trivial for people to use that. We're writing our own server stuff. So we have one person who's working on in Gunsport. It's a 4-player game. It's 4-player local and network. So we have one person who's writing netcode for that, and that's kind of what they're doing now. So they're writing something similar to, if you've ever heard of GGPO, which is like this. It's a GPL network code that's mainly used in fighting games and stuff like that. So because you want to record all the button presses, and like say in first-person shooters, they are willing to let you forget the input, but in fighters, all the input's important. You can't lose it. In the same way, in that game, you can't lose input. It'll break the game. So we're writing a network code ourselves for that. And so the handy thing about that is that we can reuse it if we don't use Unity anymore, where most of the solutions that are third-party for Unity are so Unity-specific that if you ever need to like make a second game or do anything, you're just basically rewriting the same thing again, and you just don't want to do that. Yep.
I did some Unity stuff before, and then one problem I came across is, and I don't know if you came across it yourself, but if you build a game and you export it and you have it ready to go, getting a serial key feature in there, so like making sure that nobody copies, if they don't send each other the game on an email or something. So having serial.
Like locking it up.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't really care too much about that because people will do it no matter what. You can't actually protect the content. Like you can't protect assets. You can't protect any of this stuff. Yeah. You can do stuff like obfuscate code and all this stuff, but like people can always rip assets. If your game goes into memory on your computer, it can always be ripped. So it's impossible to stop it. Yeah. So in terms of like DRM, also as well, I hate DRM. I actually just totally hate it. So I don't like buying games with DRM. So I don't want to sell games with DRM. So, and also like you're kind of getting into a problem that you can't really solve. So say for instance, lots of games have keys, but like the only person that really inhibits are the people who actually purchase the stuff. So like if you go to like any torrent site, you can download any game key free. So the only people who will ever experience that kind of experience are the people who give you money. So I understand why people do it because they want to protect their stuff, but it's just a battle you can't win, and you're just going to make yourself really mad and kind of annoyed, and probably spend money because most of the solutions cost money because there's companies like dedicated to doing that stuff. So yeah, I mean there's other stuff as well. I guess you could try if you wanted like on live or like that kind of stuff where this stuff is on a server and you're just kind of streaming it. But I don't know. They're like stuff like that as well. Those type of platforms, the games are nearly specifically written for those platforms. So if those platform holders ever disappear, the server's proprietary, so your game is basically non-existent. You've lost your game totally forever. So yeah.
Yep. What's the nearest competitor to Unity? So if it's
Unreal.
Unreal.
Yeah. Like Unreal, you get the source code, €10 a month, or €20 a month. You get access to the source code. You don't get access to the source code with Unity, and it's probably one of the most annoying things because if there's a bug, you can't fix it. So, like I had a bug where it updated and Bluetooth controllers crashes Unity, and no explanation of that anywhere. And it was only through basically like 2 days of being on their forum trying to debug it with them that they figured out that happened. And I couldn't fix it till they released a bug patch, so I had to revert back to an older version. And we wasted like 2 or 3 days of development on that because I couldn't actually turn on the engine. So
next best is
next best is like Unreal. Then it depends. After that, it kind of depends. Like certain with Unreal, if you're not willing to touch C++, then probably don't ever touch Unreal because it's just all C++. They got rid of Unreal Script, which was their scripting language, because they just decided that people who use Unreal don't want that. And they're probably right. But if you don't want to use Unreal, you kind of need to work out then what your game is. Is it 3D? Is it 2D? Is it 3D? Then you're probably in for a bit of trouble because there's not that many engines, and most of them are proprietary. Games industry is really, really proprietary. Very little open source solutions or free solutions or anything that's not proprietary, basically. So You could try Crytek Engine, which is maybe Crytek, that uses Lua and C++, but that is probably a license cost that's too much for the average person. You could try using Ogre, which is a C++ rendering engine, and then just getting like something like Bullet Physics, which is kind of like Havoc Physics, and just attaching all these 3D libraries. We don't do that because that's too expensive in time. It's not expensive in money, but like then you're maintaining these 3 libraries. You got to make sure they're up to date. If one gets up to date and breaks the bindings that you have, and there's all this stuff, and it's just you get control, but that kind of control generally only matters if your game's worth like $1 million. If your game costs a couple of million, then you probably need to be able to fix bugs right then. If your game is like ours, we can wait a day or two. It's not a big deal. So if you want to do 2D games, there's plenty of frameworks to do that stuff. So go like XNA framework is 2D framework. There's like Love, there's Pygame if you want to use Python. There's all these like mini frameworks for 2D stuff. Yeah. Flash, yeah, you could still, I guess. I mean, the problem with Flash is that like more and more people don't have Flash on their systems. Like say there's no Flash on iPhone, so if you want to do a small game, most people probably want to put it on mobile, and then those people can't play it. So there's this library called Hex, which is HAXE, I think, and you write in their language, and then they execute out to a bunch of native binaries, and one of the native binaries is Flash. So you could do that if you wanted to export to Flash as well, and then you can still have regular desktop versions and iPhone versions. But in general, I don't really know many people doing like ActionScript Flash stuff anymore, just because it's just not that popular anymore. You still can though. I mean, your game. Yep.
You're saying that books and the like aren't great for learning about, say, render calls and things like that.
Yeah.
Do you have any resources?
No. I'm not even trying to be like. It's just you like. I know this stuff by failing a lot and doing really bad things and being mad and going, what the heck is going on, and trying to figure it out. The best way is maybe like, if you know OpenGL, you'll know a lot of what's actually happening in the background, and you can think in your mind what's maybe happening. Then you can kind of work it out. Finding a good Unity group is probably a good way of getting around that stuff, like finding like an IRC forum where people who are actually professionals hang out, or people who I don't mean professional in the way that like they're like 10-year pros. I mean they're people who are actually finishing games and publishing them. They'll have the exact same experiences of that stuff, and then they're willing to say, hey, it's probably this thing, check that thing. But you essentially have to be willing to do a lot of research yourself. If you're willing to do the research, then there's people who can tell you where to look. Generally, if you go to IRC or go to these other stuff, that's pretty much. If you go to like TIG source forums, if you know that, it's like an independent game developer forum. Most of the independent game development people either hang out there or browse it and don't post. But if you ask them, they'll generally like tell you the direction. But it's all your own work. You have to do it all yourself, basically, because people don't have time. So.
It's on a different tack. How did you find it was taught at college?
What did I think of it?
Yeah, just out of interest.
I wouldn't do it if I went again, because it's just kind of a waste of time. Yeah. But also, I had to go to realize that. So yeah. I don't know. I mean, college can't really teach anyone or give anyone a job. It can teach you how to teach yourself, and then if you're willing to teach yourself, you can do everything you want to do. Yeah. So I think the most valuable thing out of most of it is if you can be taught how to teach yourself, then I think college is probably worth it. But for a lot of people, they're not really interested to begin with.
But for the game so specifically, did you feel it was kind of all old hat? Or
yeah. It's people who don't play games, people who don't really know much about games. Nice people, and they're not out maliciously to like do anything bad. But they don't keep up with the industry. They don't go to industry events. They don't know anything about what's going on. And the games course that I went to is specifically a games course, but they just don't know anything. And they admit it, like they're not trying to lie or anything, but the course is designed almost specifically that they don't care about getting people who have done stuff. So other courses, bigger courses, have people who are in games. So like the lead designer of Naughty Dog is now an actual lecturer at a course. Bennett Foddy, who made QWOP, if you've ever played that, he's at the NYU Game Center. And there's all these other people who are in courses, but they can only help you so far. If you're not already driven to teach yourself, it doesn't matter who you have. Like you could have the best lecturer ever, and if you don't appreciate the fact that you need to teach yourself, then you're never going to do anything anyway. So you can blame them if you want, but it doesn't change the fact that at the end of the day, they taught you like the tools, and they might not have taught you specifically what you wanted, but you knew how to get there and you chose not to. Yep.
So you just mentioned events. Are you talking the likes of E3 or actually TechCon?
E3, well, not E3 because E3 is like a kind of public event, but like GDC, Indiecade. There's all these events that, like, if you want to meet anyone in the industry, games industry is really, really small, and you can pretty much meet anyone or get a call with anyone or like talk to anyone just by going to an event, because they're just people and they're willing to talk to anyone because they're just regular people. And you can go to an event and it might cost, like to go to GC probably costs about €3,000, but to a college who has a lecturer, that's not a lot of money. And if they're really interested in making their course well, they should be able to fight to get that much money to go to an event. And they don't even need to do anything, they just need to just know what's even happening, and they don't. And it's kind of sad because they're trying to encourage people to go into a scene that they don't even care about. So that's a bit of a sad note to games, but no, it's, yeah. That's right. Yeah.